Okay. So, hello everyone. I think we're just going to go ahead and get started. I see there's still a big crowd outside the door, so you're the lucky ones who forced your way in here early. My name's Samantha Smith. I'm the director of the Just Transition Center, which was founded by the International Trade Union Confederation, representing more than 200 million organized workers in 162 countries, and the European Trade Union Confederation, which represents workers across all sectors and across the whole of the EU. Today, the purpose of this event is actually to show what unions are doing, to show unions in action. Because we hear a lot of discussion now about just transition, and is it really compatible with climate ambition? If you have just transition, doesn't it slow things down? And what we want you to know is that unions are working for climate ambition, and just transition is actually a way to go faster and further together. It is a theory of change, as well as being measures for workers. Today, you're going to hear positive examples from unions around the world. You're going to hear about 2 national just transition task forces. Welcome, Sharon. Please take one of those seats there. Today, but there are many more that are happening now in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Spain. For example, we've got some of our comrades from the Spanish trade unions here with us in Katowice, in Scotland. And we're going to start out with the Honorable Minister of Environment from Canada and the Canadian unions, who are going to tell us a lot more about their national task force on just transition and all the work that they've been doing. So I want to welcome Sharon Burrow, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Sharon is our leader, and she's also going to be the moderator of the event. And I would also like to introduce Donald Lafleur, who is the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, and he will say a few short words of introduction to the panel on Canada. Thank you very much. Thanks, Donald.
Thank you, Samantha. Bonjour.
Let me make one logistical announcement. There are 2 sets of headsets. So if you want translation in French, you should go outside to get a if you can. I'm not sure if you can get outside now. To get a headset for French translation, we will have some speakers in French, I think. And then if you want translation to Spanish, the headsets are here in this room, right over there. The translator's raising his hand.
Thank you, Samantha. Bonjour, je m'appelle Donald Lafleur, je suis vice-président exécutif au Congrès du travail du Canada. Merci de votre présence ici aujourd'hui. It is our pleasure to co-host this event with the Just Transition Center. We're grateful for the hard work of Samantha Smith, who is just on stage here, and the Just Transition Center. Our collaboration has brought tremendous value to our work on just transition, with the ultimate goal of raising ambition on climate change. The labor movement worked hard to shape the Just Transition Task Force, which includes strong representation from unions that most of the coal workers belong to in Canada. It is co-chaired by the CLC, our brother CLC President Hassan Yousaf, and a prominent Canadian environmentalist with a strong labor presence, of course, on the task force. The task force also has an employer perspective, people with expertise in sustainable development and workforce transition. It also includes someone who brings the perspective of affected communities. It spent springtime traveling to coal communities and will deliver its report to the minister by year's end. We have representatives from those unions who are on the task force here today at the front of the room, including the president of a coal mining local in the province of Alberta, Brother Roy Milne. In the interest of time, I will let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves as we make our way through the program. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce the Honourable Catherine McKenna, Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change. There is no doubt that Ms. McKenna understands the urgency of climate action. And we have seen that reflected in the Canadian negotiating team working hard to land the Paris rulebook to this COP. A small but very important aside to say that we want to see human rights and just transition reflected in the rulebook. We know the Minister also understands that just transitions for workers and communities is key to raising ambition so we can limit warming to 1.5 degrees as the recent IPCC report so urgently laid out for the world to see. We want to thank Canada for signing onto the Solidarity and Just Transition Silesia Declaration last week, and we're looking forward to the discussion here about Canada's just transition. Merci d'être parmi nous. Ministre McKenney, la parole est la vôtre.
Alors, merci, Donald. Alors, je suis tellement heureuse d'être ici. Look, there are people who are much better placed than me to talk about this, and I really hope that we talk about what the Just Transition Task Force did in Canada. It's hard. Just transitions, we've had some unjust transitions. I think we all know about those. And if we are going to be ambitious, we need workers, we need communities, we need people to be at the forefront. I think that that's probably truer than ever before, and I think we've seen what's happened sometimes if you don't think of workers and people first. We really have to be thoughtful. As I always say, hard things are hard. And when you phase out coal, people are affected, communities, workers. And I'm just really proud of the trade union movement in Canada that it's really stepped up. It said, you know, it could be a decision to fight it, but no, what's happened is that we've seen unions across Canada embrace the need for climate action. And I don't need to go through the stats, but this summer was a really tough summer, and I think it reminded Canadians about the magnitude of the challenge. I mean, the 1.5 degree report, which we certainly welcome, puts it in stark relief. But when you have people dying of extreme heat, when you have forest fires burning longer, stronger than ever before, when you have floods, droughts, and literally our Arctic is melting, you know you need to act. I mean, look, in terms of when I came into this job, we had a big task. We're a natural resource-based economy. We know that we need to do our part, but we need to do it in a thoughtful, methodical way. I was speaking with Hassan Youssef very early on about how do we make sure that workers and unions and communities are part of this transition. I'm originally from a place called Hamilton. You can look it up, the Hammer. It's a steel town. And so, alors, moi, je reconnais combien c'est important d'avoir tous les gens avec nous quand nous faisons une transition très ambitieuse. Mais si on n'a pas les employés, si on n'a pas les unions, si on n'a pas les communautés avec nous, I might have to shout louder, I know we're in a competition here. Si on n'a pas tout le monde avec nous, on va pas avoir le succès dans le long terme. I won't say more other than we're absolutely committed to ambitious climate action. When it comes to just one part of our climate plan, phasing out traditional coal-fired electricity, we think we have a very good story to tell. We have 80% of our electricity is clean, but by 2030, our goal is 90%, and phasing out coal is clearly part of that. But we need to be working with communities, and you will hear from folks who did a really great job, who had to go to communities, had to talk to workers and members of the community who were concerned, who wanted to understand that the government understood that they needed to be part of it. And we're absolutely committed to showing that you can have a just transition, that it's not just a slogan, that actually that we will provide the support, the skills development, the economic diversification, the transition centers. We have the Just Transition Task Force reports coming out, and we're committed to supporting what's in the report, and most important, making sure that we're all part of this transition. We all need to be part of it. It's not just environmentalists, it's not just political leaders, it is workers, it's communities, and this is about jobs, it's about livelihoods, it's about people feeling part of something that is critically important, which is tackling climate change, but doing it in a way that recognizes that you need to also provide good jobs, you need to support people, you need to support communities. On peut faire ça, and I really do think it's critically important, because as we go forward, we need to have models of countries who have been able to do this, that have worked with labor, that have worked with workers, that have worked with communities, and that is certainly the commitment of Canada. And I want to say we're all in this together, so I'm glad to see so many people here today. Merci.
So thank you, Minister McKenna. Give her a big hand. I think, Catherine, if I may, that we have talked about this with the Canadian unions now, and I would like to commend for several years, several COPs, in fact, and I'd like to commend your leadership, not just in Canada, but indeed globally. Last COP, you pioneered the group on Beyond Coal. Very difficult for some of our members, but essential that it's married with just transition. And the minister made that commitment in her own country, and you're going to hear more about that. Then, of course, this year we need you. Donald's right. We really need you to help us get just transition landed in the, we don't care where, but the response measures makes most sense, in the rule book, and human rights. It's hard that it's being debated again for people to understand this, the 70th anniversary. I know we always ask you to do some of the tough jobs, but okay. Please.
I'll try.
You know, again, we need you to step up, and I know that this is a fight worth having. So a minister here who has indeed worked with our trade unions, with the employers, with community, and some of those community stories are heart-rending, as indeed Tara was telling us yesterday. We know them. We walk amongst those communities. But Tara, tell me why it's so important to build trust if just transition is going to get us to the ambition we need to actually be in that space.
Sure. Thanks, Sharon. When Canada announced that we would transition away from coal-fired power by 2030, the trade union movement supported that decision, knowing that it would be hard for some of our members and that we would have to do some hard work on that. We said at that time that that decision needed to be paired with just transition for these workers. And we have a real opportunity with these coal workers to get it right, for these specific groups of workers in the 4 provinces in Canada that are still burning coal for electricity. And we need to do it both because it's the right thing to do for these workers, but also because it's necessary to build that trust amongst workers, trust that largely doesn't exist right now, that there is a path to fairness through this process. As my friend Gil McGowan from Alberta often says, these workers who have literally dedicated their lives to keeping the lights on must not be expected to shoulder the burden of this transition on their own. So we have both the opportunity and the responsibility to get it right here, so that just transition for these workers serves as a positive example, as a few people have said already, and not a cautionary tale, which is the risk. I should have started with this, that serving on this task force has been the honor of my life. I will say that going to meet with these workers and communities and employers and local councillors across this country, and how graciously we've been welcomed into their communities while they grapple with what their next chapter is, has really been a real honor and a huge learning experience. So if I can, I won't take your thunder, but traveling the country to do this work has been a real honor. So I'll just end before we move on that we've seen what can happen when that consensus breaks down. We've seen it in parts of the world. We've seen small examples of it in our country. And just to say, that these workers understand the seriousness of climate change and the need to take action. That is not in question. But we need to make sure, we must make sure that this happens in a way that increases equality, that respects workers' rights, and that provides good jobs, and that workers and unions are at the table planning this transition. And that has so far been the process with our task force, I'm proud to say. The labor movement at this COP has been using the term just transition for climate ambition. And it's a little catchy, but I would say it's also very fundamentally true that we believe, not only can just transition provide a path to greater ambition, that it might, in fact, be our only hope to do so. So, and it just really fundamentally puts people at the heart of climate action and climate protection. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And I think, give her a big hand.
And thank you.
I think Tara her colleagues would say is not only a great voice in Canada, but one that we value internationally. So thank you, Tara. Matt, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers took a very progressive, stand on this early on. And so how important is in fact those face-to-face consultations? A lot of people say to us, well, how do you do it? How do you do it? So how important is it, and what difference does it make?
Start off, it makes all the difference in the world. And you have to start with meeting with those workers out of the gate. Not an afterthought, not something that is down the line, something that happens right away. And going into those communities that Tara had talked about and touched on, meeting with those workers, a lot of them were my members. I work at our Canadian office. I'm an electrician by trade, but I haven't met all of my members across the country. So when they came out to these town hall meetings and realized that one of the representatives from their union was sitting there, not only myself but other union members, it was special to them. They knew that there was somebody that was actually going to listen to them, and it wasn't, and no offense to any government officials in the room, they didn't want to talk to a government official. They wanted to talk to someone that they knew that was going to be working their best interest. So there was a bit of a relief on their part. They were able to share their stories, their struggles, their concerns, and the challenges they face. But like Tara mentioned, they do want to see climate action. You know, they're living, they're hunters, they're fishers, they enjoy the outdoors. They want to make sure it's there around for their children, their grandchildren. So they want to play a role in making sure that they're part of the solution. And having that part of the solution is listening to them and their voices, and give them a part of the table, a place at the table where they can have leverage and working with the other stakeholders to make this a real transition for them on their behalf, that they're looked after, that their families are looked after. They're getting jobs, as Tara mentioned, that are not precarious work, not looking for something that is left over or minimum wage, something that these workers make good money. They're very proud of the work that they do, powering their communities. It's something that has been in some of their family for generations and generations. So this is a big step for them. I heard from my members across the country that were involved that they were, that they were being consulted for a change and listened to. They felt good. They're constantly contacting me about when's the report coming out? When's the report coming out? They're engaged. They want to know what's happening. The next step is not only engaging them at the beginning of the process, but during the transition period. We have 4 provinces that are impacted, and those workers in each province are going to be impacted at a different time. Plenty of my members were laid off in December of last year, before this task force even took place. Some of our recommendations in the interim report, one has already been taken a step by Minister McKenna, and that was opening up just transition centers in Alberta, the first province that's been impacted by this. And that was directly from the voice of those workers. They needed a place where they can go and their voice can be heard, and they can get all the information they need in one place. So that was a first step. My members had contacted me, letting me know that, workers had been heard, and they're like, we're looking forward to more, what's down the line. The responsibilities of these representatives all across this, not only for us that are here on behalf of labor, but the other folks on that Just Transition Task Force, spent a lot of time. We're all very proud of the work that we did. We spent some long hours, but we know at the end of the day, after meeting with those workers, that pales in comparison to the challenges that they face. I would say our role was tough. It was a very humbling and honored experience, but hearing from those workers and their families and the concerns in the town halls that we went to, in every little corner of the province that were coal communities, was fantastic. Their voices were heard. They know that it was heard. That was the big part of it. The next step is beyond the transition. So once the transition happens, we need to make sure that these workers aren't falling through the cracks, that we can track this so that other countries and other transition of other industries can be used as a model, making sure those workers, have they moved on to retirement? Did that bridging work properly? Did they find a new job that is of the same value of pay or benefits and a pension? If they didn't, why not? Were they able to be retrained into did they move from their current community to a different community? And I think that's kind of the final piece, is after the transition, making sure that, oh, well, we thought we did a good job. No, they want to make sure that they expressed to us in our consultations across the 4 provinces that they wanted to make sure that they could share their story in a positive light beyond just the transition.
And I think
I'll wrap up with that. Thank you.
That's really critical. And as I, of course, introduced Roy Milne, who's the president of the United Steelworkers Local 1595 from Alberta, then you can understand that this is the big story. We've got to get it right through the transition to build that hope and trust, but it's really how do we reinvent, renew communities and give people, and generationally give people the confidence that they can build a future. So, Roy, none of us underestimates the struggle it is for you and your members, but indeed, tell us about coal workers in Alberta. Where are you at? What do you want now? You've got an agreement both nationally and provincially and now nationally, but what's the next steps?
Well, I guess probably the next step is to actually see everything happen. I'm just going to add a cautionary note. The process has worked very well. The unions, the leadership has supported the just transition away from fossil fuels because it's the right thing to do for the planet. But hand in hand with that goes the just transition. And there have been some major steps taken with the task force. At the provincial level, there's been a number of supports put in place. So I would say for our average rank and file member, they would say the glass is half full. But a union is the same as any organization. You've got leadership and you have rank and file that all have their own individual opinions. And the leadership is educated and committed. The rank and file needs to be shown that there's actually the trust that has been built that was spoken of is actually going to translate into something, because when your job has disappeared and your community is disappearing, you want to actually have something more than promises. And just the last month, I just assisted with over 100 layoff notices for another round of layoffs. The first for the actual coal workers, and there'll be more this fall. And that's in addition to a couple hundred that have left, in that they have quit, walked away, aren't looking for any kind of a package or any kind of retraining because they just don't believe that it's actually going to be a just transition and they need a job someplace else. So I think that's the very big challenge that's facing the unions and the entire movement is to build that trust down to the rank and file, because if you're trying to get a buy-in from a population, you have to show that you're going to have a just transition and that it's going to be timely. Because for my members that are going to be laid off in February, there'll be a glass half full, but the rest of the promise hasn't got there yet. I'm hoping very much that once this report comes out and we see some action, we'll be able to complete building that trust.
And Roy, for you, from our perspective, you represent the front lines of the real courage in this mix. There'll be dislocations everywhere in every sector. There'll be changing nature of technology and work. We know that. But for those who've actually walked the communities where the mines have been, they are fantastic places. They are great union jobs. The unions in the mine communities are some of the greatest unions I'll ever work with, because they don't just build good jobs, they build communities. And so I thank you, and I know that, you're all going to be the toughest end of the chain, if you like. So we value your courage. And really it leads us into Sari, because Sari Saarinen represents Unifor, and she's the Health, Safety and Environment Director. But Sari, we also believe it's not just about the workers themselves, although that's fundamental for us. It's about their communities. So you had the mandate as the task force to make recommendations on both affected workers and communities. Can you tell us about what a just transition looks like for communities and what more we need to do in that regard?
Thanks, Sharon. Definitely communities, they're the backbone of our country. It's not just the large cities where the population exists, it is in rural communities as well. And that's where many of these coal-fired plants are, is in small communities. There may be the sole employer. So as a worker, my community involvement is not just the union family that I'm with, but it's also the community. It's the hockey rinks. It's the corner store that I go to. It's the garage that I use. those are the individual that also rely on indirectly and directly to the wages that come out of that coal plant or coal-fired plant. So looking at the community is how do we ensure that the communities are at the table and they're not just looking outside, because the impact to them can be very devastating. So the trust building that we've heard from the other panelists is so vital to ensure that it's not just the workers who are also community members, but employers, they're community members as well. And the business owners, the politicians in the community as well, none of them want to set up home in a Winnebago and go to the next job. They want to ensure that they're building the roots in their communities for their families and their grandchildren. And so that means that, yes, there are some innovations that need to take place. That means that industries need to look at how do we play a role into that next generation of renewable energy workplaces that need to be populating our rural areas. So you need to have those vibrant communities where you will also be attracting the next generation of workers, the next families that come in. But you also, as with my health and safety hat on, that psychosocial burden that not only the workers but the communities can carry will have far-reaching effects into our healthcare system as well as any of the other social assistance. So it is really the roots building in the fabric of Canada, and this Just Transition Task Force has that immense task of ensuring that those roots are deep in those rural communities and they're not affected adversely, but they're a part of the discussions and ensuring that there is a tomorrow and no one's left behind.
Well, what a great set of stories. Lots more to be done, but go Canada. And thank you for demonstrating that partnerships are the platform that we need to invest in to take it forward. Minister, thank you. Thank you to your other leaders involved, but really to the team, my colleagues out there on the front lines, thank you for your courage and your commitment to working people. Give them a big hand, everybody. And sadly, I'm going to ask them to vacate these chairs because there are some platforms in other parts of the world. Did I do something wrong? No? No. Group photo. Okay. Thanks, Joel. Get it right. Photo? Oh, me too.
Sorry. Get in, Sharon. There we go.
I don't know how it's
Actually, I wanted to give you a hug. So.
Team Canada. Plus Sharon.
Yeah, that's right. The ring in from... Okay, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Canada.
Thank you guys very much. And I'm sorry I didn't have time this morning. No, we understood. We were close to here.
And if we need to, Catherine, if we need to beat up people on getting it into the...
We're working on it.
Tell us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll need to beat up. For sure you're going to need to beat up.
Exactly. Persuade them nicely.
Persuade them.
Okay, come on up New Zealand and come on up the International Transport Federation and Norway trade unions. Where are you? All right. Sam. Oh, all right. All right. Go. When is Spanish coming up? Not yet. Not yet. Yeah, I guess. Are you ready? Let's see. Oh, great.
I'm rain here practically this morning.
Okay.
I'm made it. I'm made it.
Here right now. Okay. So you want
After
to
this one, I'm going to be able to
here?
just to get that. Honestly, you're going to
Come later.
yeah.
I'm okay with the last word. So we can start with the
Yep. Yep. Okay. Okay. Let's go to the panel up here. And Guys,
Well, we
take a seat.
met at the meeting in
Do come in.
yes, that's correct. That's correct.
yes.
Saturday.
Yeah.
That's
Thanks
correct.
for meeting. I'm from
Can, we have some representatives of the Maori community. There's a couple of chairs here, folks.
I have to use manners. I'm not so good in English. So I have to prepare.
Yeah.
Samantha.
So I'm going to do this in reverse order. Let me say, first of all, because we are honoured to have members of the Maori community and our unions from New Zealand, my part of the world, so tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. But because Minister Shaw is stuck in the Talanoa dialogue, and I understand that because I just did one myself, and it just is fascinating, so we're going to go reverse order. So, R.A., we're going to start with you. Our friend R.A. Thomasgard is in fact, and I can't do the roll your R's, I'm sorry, so I can't do your name properly in terms of justice to it. But the Norwegian Federation of Trade Unions, of course, is a close ally, and they are building a different type of platform, but I'll let R.A. tell you about that. So.
Thank you, Sharon. Comrades, it must be crystal clear that there is no option but to deliver on the climate goals. The fight against the climate change is also trade union business. Workforce and decent jobs really means that workers' participation of the workforce dialogue are critical to further climate work. We need people's understanding, willingness and support to get us to zero emission and climate-friendly future. We are pleased to see that our efforts to have an extra focus on just transition at COP24 have given us results with the Polish COP24 presidency's initiative, Solidarity and Just Transition Silesia Declaration. Despite that the trade unions have a pretty good dialogue with the Norwegian government on climate and just transition issues, the government to support especially in international climate negotiation, we have not succeeded in convincing the Norwegian government to establish a national Just Transition Council or task force yet. Therefore, we have reached out to the city of Oslo. We have worked closely with the Oslo government on several issues, and we have also met support for our Just Transition and Decent Work agenda. At the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco in September this year, LO presented a pledge together with the governing mayor in Oslo to establish the Oslo model on just transition. A Just Transition Task Force is soon to be appointed, and this task force will discuss and give advice on ways to secure that Oslo's ambitious climate plan is merged with a just transition of the workforce. I will give you one example to why we need a Just Transition Task Force. Oslo decided to have a car-free city center, and they have replaced the parking lots and parking spaces with the cycle lanes and space for walking. This is fine in many ways, but they forgot to discuss this with the unions and the workers who transport goods to the shops and to the restaurants. How can they deliver the goods to their customers when they are not allowed to drive there? This is, of course, an issue that the Just Transition Task Force will discuss and find solutions for. We hope and plan to make such a great model in Oslo that other city governments and even the national government will see that this is the way to do it, working together, ensuring just transition. The Just Transition Center has assisted us in this work, and I would like to give a special thanks to Samantha Smith and the rest of the staff at the Just Transition Center, who provides a very important role in the trade unions movement work to achieve just transition. Competence is key managed to transition. There is a need for better measures to ensure that people can get access to new skills and lifelong learning. At home, we have seen that workers have access to training and skills development have been reduced the last years, and the number of workers participating in lifelong learning activities is the lowest level for 10 years. This negative development is particularly strong for the workers over 50 years. Unfortunately, we see less investments in competence. We have to strengthen our fight to these rights for long life learning. LOC's carbon capture and storage, CCS, as necessary to reach the climate goals, but also as a tool for a just transition. Both the International Panel of Climate Change and the International Energy Agency agree that CCS is absolutely essential to meet the world's climate goals, and we are many who agree with them. This is no paradox. CCS is a future major area for development and green growth, especially for the industrial process. We see it as extremely important to share knowledge about CCS and discuss ways forward. In LO's opinion, Norway can build a CCS future on the shoulders of today's high-competence workplaces in the oil and gas sector, the maritime industry, the process industry, and the blooming and environmentally friendly technology development. We can be good at this, but to make it happen, it takes political will and courage to think long-term and holistically. For LO, it's obvious that CCS industry will be essential in the transition to low-carbon society. It's also obvious to us that the transition must be just. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, give him a big hand. And can I say, it's not just that, in fact, the labour unions are taking the lead in Norway, but in fact, they've impressed on the political process just how important this is. And this morning, Ari and I were able to say to the Norwegian Labour Party, in opposition at the moment, but how pleased we are that they've shifted and driven greater ambition on their climate policy. So we can have an impact at government level as well as at city level, which is what today's real story is, because Oslo was one of the first cities to actually build a commitment to to what the C40 group is called Clean Streets program. And Ari's right that when they came out with this laudable ambition, Sam Smith had the foresight to say to the unions and to the council, well, you need to talk to the unions about this. And to the unions, you need to talk to the city about this. And when the city said, but the transport unions are pretty upset about it, she said, well, exactly. You need to talk to them. Well, what will happen if we don't? Well, if you talk to them now, you'll avoid a transport strike down the track. Well, the result is a great partnership. And in California, we were delighted to have both the union leader, Hans Christian from LO, and indeed the Mayor of Oslo. And we want to socialise that process through the European Union with an event early in the year to try and raise the competitive base for other cities throughout Europe in this case. But we also know that we couldn't have done this without the support of the International Transport Federation, because Steve Cotton, who is the General Secretary of the ITF, came on board with us, took a little conversation here and there, but he's totally committed to this, and again in California, stood on the stage with the C40 group of cities and a partnership we have with them, and committed the ITF to the Clean Streets campaign in every city. That's just fantastic. And John Mwanka is indeed the chair of the Urban Transport Committee from the ITF. John, tell us about the commitment between ITF and the C40 group, and what's the motivation for the transport unions to collaborate on these questions?
Thank you very much, Sister Sharon. From the ITF, I first want to congratulate you for the re-election recently last week. And we think that as we move this journey of getting action around just transition, the labor movement needs champions, needs winners like yourself. Thank you very much. From the ITF, we are very excited about the partnership we are getting into with the C40 cities. And we're motivated from a theoretical background of thinking that transport should be a public good. a public service, just like health, like water, like school, because we think that millions of our workers are not getting good jobs. Millions of our urban poor are not getting cheap and reliable transport. Millions of our informal workers are not getting their livelihood sorted out, leave alone any other inhabitants in our cities. Why? Because as we speak right now, public transport or transport is in the control of the corporate world, the control of the capitalists. So at ITF, we've designed a program, our public transport program, that wants to champion two causes. One, to ensure that public transport is indeed a public service. Two, to build the industrial power of our labor unions, of our affiliates, to be able to engage in political decisions so that we can change the rules. And we see this as an opportunity through the C40 partnership, because recently, as you alluded to, C40 had a declaration on what is called Green and Healthy Streets Declaration. This has two very exciting, bold decisions that we think we can resonate with. One, they think that by 2025, the C40 members, working with their mayors, should be able to procure electric buses. And by 2030, they are very ambitious to think that we should have streets that are carbon free. Now, this is where we come in to say now, as we look at this, we need to look at it at the framework of the just transition, such that we have decent jobs, such that we ensure accessibility of public transport, so that we ensure sustainability of public transport, and we ensure that the workers would be at the forefront. Already we are working with the Justice Transition Center to tease out what can work best for us, what can be learned from Oslo, what can be learned from Vancouver, to see that we not only work with cities where things are smooth, like Oslo and Vancouver, but also take on cities where things are difficult. Because it is only when we do the difficult things that we shall be champions, that we shall be able to change the rules, and we shall be able to ensure that public transport is indeed a public good. And as ITF, our leadership, right from our President Paddy, our General Secretary Steve Cotton, are behind this, and we shall be in very near future be announcing a strategy of how we shall move forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. And John's also driving very ambitious plans through the corridors in Africa, and we think that this partnership's got real merit. It's not just about public transport itself or the bus routes being low carbon or zero carbon, we hope, but in fact it's also about the supply chains. You change the nature of the emissions base, you build manufacturing jobs, you upskill workers, we actually can make a difference. Now, they're the things we now need to map and champion and make sure they're part of the bigger package. But we're very excited about the C40 group of cities and the partnerships with our trade unions and major employers in the city. We're moving it from transport now to zero-emission buildings, both in retrofit opportunities for jobs and climate, but also in new construction. So this is a great news story and a great segue, actually, to welcome, in fact, some of my nearest neighbours when I'm at home, which isn't very often, but in fact, Minister Shaw and indeed Richard, a very old friend who's the president of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions. But let me say, Minister Shaw, that with your government, we have real hope. And last week at our Global Congress, your Prime Minister, our friend Jacinda, actually spoke to the Congress via video and talked about climate, about rights, about the future for people. And yesterday, I can tell you that the Minister and I shared a platform in telling the investors they have to put their money where their mouth is. Our pension funds invested in just transition. So we're delighted to have you with us, and we know that New Zealand's building a whole new platform on a zero carbon economy ambition, and indeed with just transition. So tell us about New Zealand's plans.
Well, thank you. Look, I wanted to start by talking about one of the things that we have done this year that's been controversial and difficult, rather than about the kind of whole overall plan. So back in March, the government announced that we would no longer be issuing exploration permits for offshore oil and gas. And we're I think the second country in the world to do so after France. We have, it's not a huge sector of the overall economy, but it is very important to one particular region. And it is, gas is part of our fuel mix at the moment, and it helps to backstop in the winter when our hydro lakes are low and our energy use is high. It's an important part of our energy mix at the moment. But in our view, we know that by the year 2050, we need to have phased out fossil fuel use in our energy mix completely. And that's true not just of New Zealand, but everywhere in the world. We have an existing extractive industry there, and we also have about 100,000 square kilometres of ocean floor currently under exploration as well. And so the view that we took was that if we said that we would stop exploration where it is now, would leave the existing exploration permits open, leave existing extraction open, then essentially that would kind of phase out over the course of the next 2 to 3 decades. That's, like I said, that's controversial on a number of fronts. But the bit that I wanted to focus on, because you could argue that, and people do argue that gas is an important transition fuel, that we're going to need it for longer than that, and so on. And I don't want to get into that debate. But the bit that I want to get into is what it means in terms of just transitions for that region, for that industry, for those communities, and for those workers. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of resistance to that decision in that region because it's not the only industry in the region, but it is one of 2 big earners along with the dairy industry. And so what we need to I think be really mindful of as we go through this transition over the course of the next few decades is that there are going to be some really tough calls that have to be made, right? We know that, right? We're not going to. There's no easy way for any country and as a globe for us to do what needs to be done. But when we're asking, essentially there are some industries that are going to carry a disproportionate share of the load of that transition. I believe that because society is kind of saying we need to make this transition because we want to keep global temperatures to what they are and so on, that governments therefore have a responsibility to work very closely and to support those communities and those industries and those workers through that transition. So some of the things that we are doing in that region called Taranaki is, and actually we're working with a couple of other regions as well, but they're really at the forefront of this in a lot of ways, is to take a regional economic development approach. So the previous government had a regional economic development unit. They'd actually done an initial economic development plan for that region. What we've done is we've kind of revisited that plan in light of the need to make this particular transition, and said, well, how do we actually build on that strength? So we've got huge amounts of engineering talent. We've got some pretty heavy infrastructure there. There's a lot of kind of skills and investment that we would like to be able to actually utilize rather than just simply turn into a stranded asset. And to say, well, to what purposes could that be put? A lot of the industry is reapplicable to geothermal, and generally when the world oil price goes down, that region takes a bit of a hit. and often moves to other parts of the country to get involved in the geothermal industry, and then it sort of flows back again when the price comes up again. There's been quite a lot of interest in hydrogen, and to what extent can we use the existing assets and repurpose those towards hydrogen as well? And when I say assets, I'm also talking about people's kind of skills and talents, not just the actual physical hard assets as well, although there's a lot that can be repurposed there. And saying, okay, well, if this particular region has been New Zealand's kind of headquarters for energy in a lot of ways, what can that look like in a post-fossil fuel world? And what's the kind of investment that the government needs to make in order to help to assist that to occur in partnership with the private sector? We've set up in our Ministry of Economic Development, we've set up a Just Transitions unit. At the moment, it's pretty nascent because we are only making our first initial kind of forays into this. It's working primarily, like I said, with Taranaki, but also with our west coast of the South Island, where our coal industry was largely headquartered, and which is a region that has, frankly, really suffered over the course of the last several decades. And then, what are the lessons that we can learn from these places that can then be applied to the rest of the country? We are intending to host a Just Transition Summit in New Zealand in the second half of next year. And we would like that to have an international dimension. So if you know anyone who would be good for that, please let me know. And we're trying to sort of bring those questions around just transitions into some of these conversations here at COP as well. Like I said, it is in the early stages. We do want to take a really evidence-based approach to this, but we recognise that actually very few places in the world have got a lot of experience in how to handle these kinds of transitions. So we are looking to kind of share those experiences, but also to learn from others as we go as well. Like I said, we know that we are committed to a very ambitious climate challenge, right? We want to basically be phasing out our, in particular carbon dioxide as fast as possible from our economy, and that is going to take quite a lot of hard work. And there is a real risk that the effects of that change will be felt by our lowest income households and by particular regions and industries, and that if we do not pay very close attention to supporting those people through that, then the whole thing will fall apart because we just won't have the social license. And you can see that resistance in New Zealand. You can also see it in plenty of other countries around the world as well. And note what happened recently in France with a rise in petrol tax, right? We have the same thing actually. We introduced a regional fuel tax in Auckland, our largest city, to help pay for the transition to public transport. That happened to occur at the same time as the New Zealand dollar went down in value and the global oil price went up. And so prices spiked from about $1.40 New Zealand per litre to about $2.40 per litre. And there was huge public. It was probably the worst thing that's kind of happened in many ways in terms of our government, because it just creates that resistance. So we really need to think about the options that people have got and how we support them through those, because otherwise this whole program is basically dead in the water before we get started. Thank you.
And in fact, they're the things that we have to have partnerships around managing, because giving people hope and trust is the heart of just transition, and we believe it will absolutely get us to the high ambition road we want. Minister Shaw, you and just before you, Minister McKenna from Canada was here, two of our best advocates nationally and internationally, but we have a big favour to ask of you. A thank you first for signing the Solidarity Declaration of the Polish President, which was indeed developed with us, and the Just Transition commitments there, plus the commitments to decent work through the process. But we need your help. We need to see that it lands in the rule book, Just Transition lands in the rule book, and indeed human rights land in the rule book. And so, we ask all our friends who understand that people matter to help us on this one. But thank you for your leadership. But Richard, we want to know what it looks like from the Labor side, because, You know, Richard and his colleagues in the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions have been very committed to this. And as the government came to power, of course, they took the opportunity to actually build that new platform in partnership. But tell us about the challenges you see around the transition.
Thank you, Sharon. Ina mana, ina rio, ina karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I think a couple of perspectives on New Zealand. One is actually that energy isn't our biggest emissions area, it's agriculture. Two is that, in no particular order, two is we've got a change of government, which is getting on with this stuff, which is fantastic, but really putting the focus on it. Three is, of course, we have a very important commitment to our Indigenous population, the Māori population, who have a very strong and powerful commitment to the land. Kaitiakitanga, guardian and conservation. There's people in this room who can speak to that much better than I can, but I want to acknowledge an incredibly powerful sense of commitment and deep kinship between humankind and the natural world within Māori culture, and how important that is to all of us to see that through. And indeed, the measure of a community is measured by the health of the environment within that framework. The other point I want to make about the situation we're in is that we don't do change well. Historically, we've tended to rely on market solutions, and some would say neoliberal market solutions, which have meant adjustments have been really tough, and we've tended to leave whole populations behind to the ravages of the market. And our safety net has amounted to individual workers putting up their name at the social welfare office on a board looking for a new job. And what that means is a lot of people are quite frightened of change. While there is at an intellectual level of a realisation, not from everyone, but from certainly the union leadership and a good deal of working people, that global climate change is on us, we've got to do something, there is a resistance. And obviously that's a huge challenge to us, because from our point of view, the union movement has a very important role to play in the political leadership. We need to get out there and show working people that their voices in this, we do need to make this change, and they need to be part of the ride. So one of the things that we found when this significant announcement that James was talking about in Taranaki about the licensing, there was the usual calamity from the media, the business community, the sky was going to fall in, and of course a lot of working people in that industry and union members bought into this. They're susceptible to those messages, they worry about their future. And we saw it as our role, along with our social partners in business and government, to create a sense of calm and certainty. Because what we find in change is that people fear change if they can't see themselves in the future. And we're really committed to trying to show people there is a good future for you, and we're going to work hand in hand with everybody to get from here to there. And that for us is what a just transition is really about. One of the key moments that we found is we took some of our union leaders and engineering types, guys, and they were men, on the ground to a conference in Australia, an ACTU conference, where there were NGOs, environmental groups, business and unions. And after about 2 hours, the ice really thawed, because once we all realised we're in this together and we want to get to a better place together, people started to relax. But when the meeting started, the workers felt they were on the defensive because they were the problem, and the environmental groups thought they were the problem, and you had this kind of dynamic. But once we showed everyone, no one's the problem, we're all part of the solution, let's figure it out together, it really changed the whole mood of the meeting. We managed to bring that back to New Zealand, and now that union is a real leader in the community, in the Taranaki community, and talking with workers about, we have got a future, it's not going to be this one, but it's not the end of the world, we can really go places. So for us, the political leadership of the union is really important, and we want to really encourage everyone to talk about this and to say, let's do this together. One of the things we did to demonstrate that political leadership was to work with Samantha and the ITUC Just Transitions Unit, and we staged a round table in New Zealand where we had business, government, James spoke along with a number of your colleagues, the CTU, environmental groups, and we had a whole day round table on what the future holds, just transition, and how do we get there. And the union movement is trying to be a leader in this discussion, and I think we managed to do that by the staging of this very significant event. In regions like Taranaki, this is the area where the energy work is, we're linking up with public service agencies, with government agencies, and it turns out that unions have better networks than anybody. Unions are able to create the conversations amongst the people most threatened, and unions are a real key to this success. One of our problems is, as you all know, unions are under the pump, generally speaking, and resources are scarce. So we're really keen to ask governments and others to lend a hand with our resourcing so we can really do the work with communities and really put our enough resourcing into it away from collective bargaining and everything else. But I think just the final point I'd like to make is that one of the things about just transition is for working people, we are facing it from a number of angles. Obviously, technology is a big deal for us, and the whole future of work issue is an enormous issue for us. But we see enormous synergy and there's a lot to gain from learning how to do change well, whether the change is driven by technology or whether it's driven by climate or all of those things that approach us from the future. For us, in many ways, it's not all that different. It's about getting together, working out where we want to go and working out how we get there from here and leaving no one behind. I know it sounds like a slogan. There's no substitute for talking about it with working people. But from what we can see, whether you're talking about climate or technology or anything else, people will be defensive unless they can see a future for themselves. And I believe unions, employers, government, the social partners, community groups, got to stand together hand in hand and tell everyone we're going to make this work for everyone. Let's just work together to make it happen. Thanks, Sharon.
Fantastic. And there's no doubt that in terms of the work of the future, then last week at the Congress, we had your very own Loris Park, who crosses the divide between unions and the Maori community, and as a friend and heroic sister to many of us for many years. But we brought exactly that together. What are the challenges that require just transitions? Climate, technology, sometimes that's a convergence, and of course displacement of people, whether it's conflict, economic desperation, or simply shifts in the economy. So thank you very much to Richard and to James. Kia ora. Thank you. New Zealand, like Oslo, like our transport federations and the cities around the world, you are actually driving platforms for change in partnership, and it's a great news story. Thank you very much. Sorry. Hopefully next year we'll get down to see you.
Great.
Yeah. Too many obstacles here. Okay, thank you very much. And we've got a final panel that's worth waiting for because it's about other stakeholders. It is, in fact, two great people from different parts of the stakeholder connection. So can I ask Christina to come up? And, of course, Howard, can you come on to the stage?
Well, we're going to organise Santa Claus and make sure there's no presents for children.
Okay, we only two. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Okay, guys, let's start. Ari's got new friends, but maybe he could take them outside. Or after, great. And can I acknowledge that there's another hero in the room, a guy called Nick Robbins, who I didn't see earlier, but Nick works with the London School of Economics and with one of the great science advocates in the world around climate, our friend Nick Stern, but also with Harvard, with the Principles of Responsible Investment, and with us, actually has put together the Investor Guide for Just Transition. Thank you, Nick. So Hawa, let's start with you. Hawa is one of the strong sisters. She comes from Africa. We've been in Europe. We're going to come back to Europe. We went to the Pacific. Now we're and we're going to Africa. So from the Nigeria Labour Congress, this sister is in fact the focal point on climate change. And just last week, her great union leader, Ayuba Wabba, was elected as our president. So the NLC is on the move. Yeah. Howard, tell us about the project that you've constructed with Friends of the Earth Nigeria, and why is that collaboration important for community?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon, all. If we take from the Paris Agreement, we know that while there is a need for equity and ambition for countries to do their fair shares, a just transition will, however, require transformation in the production and supply chain that is less environmentally disruptive and more socially acceptable. More importantly, NDCs are expected to, of course, consider sectors of their social economy that are largest contributors to greenhouse gas emission. Let me use this opportunity to quickly give a brief profile of Nigeria. Nigeria is a country of about 200 million people, of where though crude oil and gas provide about 80% of the country's revenue, it does at the same time provide less than 5% of the employment. On the other hand, agriculture, which contributes barely 25% to the GDP, provides about 80% of employment. And indeed, particularly in the rural areas, this employment could go as much as over 90%. About 70% of the people are living in abject poverty, that is poverty line of less than $1.25 per day. 30% of the population constitute the labor force, with less than 15% of this engaged in the formal employment, while the rest of over 80% are engaged in the informal sector. Oil and gas contribute about 9% of the GDP, 75% of government revenue, and about 80% of its foreign exchange earnings. Agriculture, on the other hand, contributes barely 30% to the GDP, less than 5% of government budget revenue, and it's providing, of course, like I said, about 75 to 80% of employment. Now, this is a picture of Nigeria. Generally, also, the industrial activities cover the crude oil and gas sector, as well as extractives, rubber products, wood, hides, skins, textiles, cement, and other construction, food products, footwear, chemicals, fertilizer, printing, ceramics, services, and all that. Now, what do all this mean? So putting all this together, it is clear that Nigeria is heavily dependent on crude oil and gas and other extractives for its development. It is also clear that if Nigeria as a country, just like other developing countries, whose economy is heavily dependent on fossil fuel and non-smart or non-green agriculture practice, which includes the use of chemical fertilizer, land use issues and grabbing, tree felling for fuel wood and other economic practices, bush burning, gradual introduction of the GMO, deforestation, and desertification, increasing water scarcity, and so on, that as it were, it will therefore mean that a transition away from fossil fuel economy and a move towards a cleaner and greener economy will require a lot of strategizing that will need the input of workers, communities in this process. So where are we now? In all of this, going through all of this, the NLC and Friends of the Earth Nigeria, represented by the Environmental Rights Action, signed an MOU. Indeed, the discussion started exactly about a year ago at the COP in Bonn. And then there we started discussing what can we do. There's a lot of discussion. I mean, from what we have heard earlier from other panel members, there's a lot of progress around the world, particularly in the North, on just transition. What is happening in Africa, particularly what is happening in the developing world? What can we do? what are the challenges. So this discussion started with Samantha and Donald, or Friends of the Earth, gearing us up and then putting Godwin and myself together. And then we started talking, what can we do in Nigeria? On this, we have signed an MOU to say that we want to do a just transition study on energy and agriculture sectors. Note that these sectors are are very critical and sensitive sectors in Nigeria with respect to employment and with respect to revenue to the government. And this also has happened to be some of the most important sectors that are also very critical in terms of greenhouse gas emission. So what do we want to do? How can we do that? How can we approach it? We decided we needed to take the bull by the horn and do a kind of study on what it could be, what just transition could be in the energy sector in Nigeria, what the challenges could be, what could be, who could be the victims, what could be the cost generally. And why are we doing this? We are doing this because why are we doing this? We are doing this because it is expected that Labour and the CLO's collaboration in developing common objectives to define what just energy transition could be in these sectors and the strategies that could be carried out to engage these processes. We're doing this because it is a well-known fact that across Africa, and particularly in Nigeria, land grabbing, destruction of livelihoods, and introduction of GMOs by transnational corporations is displacing tens and thousands of small-scale farmers with implications for farm workers and impacted communities, as well as the effect of gradual deforestation and desertification on the issues of climate change and its threat to food security. And it is also known fact that extractives or communities are impacted as well as workers from the devastative effect of exploration of the extractive industry. I mean specifically crude oil, gas, coal, gold, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to see we need to define what will be the rights of the communities, what are the rights of the workers, what is climate justice, what are the struggles in these communities. A just energy transition we define is we see is going from with respect to fossil fuel is currently accepted by both environmentalists and labor unions in Nigeria. So for us, that is a beginning, that's a starting point. However, the nature and form of such transition requires the engagement of environmentalists, impacted communities, and labor unions as well as workers to understand what just transition might entail. This proposal therefore provides a broad scope of engagement between the civil society organizations and labor in Nigeria to engage in consultation, dialogue, and cooperation that will lead to collaboration and joint positioning for a just transition. The target group for this project is the workers, the communities where particularly most of these activities are particularly going on. And of course, the communities are expected to largely be around the Niger Delta, whereas the agricultural communities will also focus around the middle belt of the country. The objective of the study, particularly of the project, is to develop the concept and framework for a just transition for workers and impacted communities in the two sectors as mentioned in Nigeria, strengthen partnership between the civil society organizations and labor on the one hand, and on the other hand, between the civil society organizations, labor, government, and the parliament, as well as the business on just transition in Nigeria. The project is therefore expected to test where the challenges for just transition will be in Nigeria and bring out strategies that could best be employed for the roadmap on just transition, particularly in these two sectors. And that these two sectors is also supposed to, whatever outcome we come out with in this study from these two sectors will also give us a very good idea of what can happen in other sectors or how we can also carry out plan of just transition in all the other sectors of the economy, i.e. construction, transportation, and so on and so forth in Nigeria. Above all, this project is also expected to provide a guideline that best practice framework for other countries, especially those who have similar socioeconomic reality with Nigeria on what just transition should be and what just transition should not be. Some of the activities that are proposed under this project will include capacity building for trade unions leadership on just transition. We find out that this is very essential because the trade union leadership will be expected to, in fact, drive this process. We are expecting also a situation where there's going to be consistent dialogue between the governments, between the trade unions, and of course between the businesses or the owners or the industrialists. And it is therefore important that the leaders who are going to be driving or who are going to be driving this discussion from the trade union point of view are well informed about what the just transition means and what it should not be, so that they are guided appropriately in this dialogue and the negotiations that will be going on with the industrialists, with businesses, and of course with government. It is also part of the activities will also involve an international dialogue for just transition, which is expected to be held in Nigeria, hopefully at the end of the project, and that the CSOs and laborers will are expected to engage with policymakers on just transition in the energy and agriculture sector. For now, there is no definite plan or roadmap on just transition in Nigeria. So we are hoping that this project at the end of the day will help us to kickstart the drawing of a roadmap where the government will also be involved and policymakers will also be involved, that can also be incorporated even along the implementation of the NDCs in Nigeria. In conclusion, therefore, this project is expected to build on existing struggles for rights to food, equity and clean energy access for all in Nigeria. Fossil fuel development divestment has serious implications on labor rights in a country dependent on oil and gas. The change will therefore only come if the CSOs and labor agree to work together to develop common objectives to define what the just energy transition looks like in terms of decent jobs, fair compensation, adequate training, and a reasonable time frame, and the just mobilization of the private and public sector to work together for a just transition, not just in the energy sector, and even not just in the agricultural sector, but we are also looking beyond these sectors. We are looking forward to how we strengthen our labor solidarity among workers and the unions, civil society labor relations, community alliance, business, legislature, and the executive partnership. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. And this is a really ambitious piece. If there's no plan in the government, who takes the lead? Well, we will. And in this context, with a partnership with Friends of the Earth, you have an environmental and a worker perspective. And the two sectors are very exciting for us, and I know for Sam in regard to the Just Transition Centre, because on the one hand, we're all struggling with phasing out fossil fuels and what that looks like. But on the other hand, agriculture is absolutely part of the future. It has environmental challenges, but if we have to feed 9 billion people on the planet, and if largely, in fact, the challenges is to formalise work, that decent work challenge in agriculture, how do we do that? How do we make sure land is respected for those who own it, that we're not seeing, the pillages and the raping of land ownership by big corporations, but at the same time, we're seeing a mix of dignity and markets that can make the difference. So when the Nigerian Labour Council decided agriculture was part of the equation, we are thrilled. It also has a gender dimension that is extraordinary and is not well known and is certainly ignored by policymakers around the world. So, Howard, thank you very much for just a brilliant piece of leadership, and we'll be working right alongside of you. And now...
Sorry, I just thought we could just give maybe some 2 minutes here to Godwin, who is also representing the civil society, the environmental
2 minutes,
Friends
I'm
of the
going to get
Earth,
into trouble
with
here.
whom we are working together on this project. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the 2 minutes. I will take 1 minute. Everything that Howard said is endorsed, but the critical element to understand is that civil society groups, labor, there's no clear roadmap on what just energy transition is. So we thought this program will help to provide and fill the gap of educational perspective and also policy of government. So we're actually filling that gap, and civil society is enthusiastic. for the first time, a more embracive and holistic approach, trying to work with labor, knowing fully well that labor in the past have resisted some of our actions, calling our campaigns banner headlines, leave oil in the soil, and all that. But we're trying to mend fences and work together in order to confront our government and push for people power, decentralized energy system. So this is very useful, and we look forward to involving more and more civil society groups and labor in Nigeria. Thank you.
And indeed, it's not only exciting, it's absolutely vital. We all need to move on from the divisions to the partnership, to listen to each other. And I think the inspiration through the last year of the Talanoa dialogue's been really impressive on that front. But we also need to find the solutions together, because you can hear in our language, we're as committed to communities and decent work for communities and decent futures as we are, in fact, to the solutions in the short term for workers. So they have to go hand in hand. Last but very, very, very seriously not least, a friend of the union movement, but actually an industrial leader, Christina Katowice. Christina's a friend. She's walked through this transition with us, leading the human resources interface with a company called NL. But it's not just what NL has done. Can I tell you that the CEO of NL has driven, in fact, not just the labour agreements with Chisel and others in Italy that have an eye to just transition, but taking the challenge through the European electrical producers, Euroelectric, yes, Euroelectric, and in fact the other producers call this particular CEO the greenie, but that's working for us because that leadership has brought a commitment from the industry across the board to, in fact, what we call just transition, but to rights and indeed to ambition. Christina, tell us about this thing we called cutely for the Californian Summit, the pledge, and how does the renewable energy pledge, and what does it mean for NL's policies around not just workers but communities?
Okay, thanks very much to the Just Transition Center and to Sharon, because I represent the employer side. I mean, Howard has showed a really big challenge in Nigeria, but the other speakers from government, from unions, from civil societies described this so big challenge. And I'm strongly convinced that even employers and big companies especially has a great role to act, because the title of this morning is Unions in Action. But I think that unions are really in action with employers, because industrial relation and social dialogue is the real constructive dimension to build not only just transition roads, but also the future of work. No, I've been so proud because this morning Professor Robbins gave to me this guide, Climate Change and the Just Transition, a guide for investor action, and I've been so proud that NL is really described as an example, and just I want only to comment the definition of the NL action in this guide, because it's written that in Italy, energy utility NL has committed to decarbonize its energy mix by 2050, agreed a global framework agreement with its unions and the Just Transition framework with its Italian union partners, with a focus on fair labor practices, retraining and redeployment. This is the synthesis, and as a multinational electrical company, we tried in these 2-3 last years. We have been invited by ITUC last year to work together on guidelines on just transition. And I have to admit that this invitation has been a great occasion for us to reflect on our actions and to coordinate them, even to arrive to the pledge and to the renewables action in San Francisco. But to coordinate our local, European, and global level of social dialogue on these themes. Because Sharon mentioned Euroelectric. Euroelectric is the Employers Association at European level of the electrical industries. And here there is Corina from Industrial Europe. We signed at European level last year a joint statement on just transition because we agreed and we are agreeing now that the just transition topics is the most important challenge and the most important road for social partners in the next 5-10 years. And the other real pillar of the social dialogue in Europe, but even globally, are skills and competencies. Because we have heard this morning the importance of retraining, reskilling people. But we have to act at two different levels. For young people and young employability, employers have the responsibility to work with schools and universities. And we are trying to be in contact with, Corina knows well, the action of VET providers, because for our sector, vocational education and training, and the update with the real needs of industries are one of the main pillars of youth employability. So we are trying to work for students to match the knowledge and technical, competencies from schools and from university, but to match them with industries needs. Because the industrial transformation we are facing, the Industry 4.0, is really an unknown, with no precedence in our history. So we have to face, not only from the energy point of view, but we have to face a strong transformation of all the industrial processes. So, but the other level is for aged workers, how to reinforce competencies and skills of aged workers, and especially as Enel, we are working with thermal generation workers and colleagues, because in our plants, we phased out in Italy more than 20 plants, and the redeployment agreement we reached with Italian unions focuses on the possibility to move, but also first to move workers to requalify people. We have many colleagues having worked as before we have heard from other countries, having worked 30 years in a plant, 25 years in their plant, in their communities. And it's really not easy to, to learn another job and to move to another part of the company. But we can work. Now we are working together with unions and also with communities to transform our industrial processes. In Italy, we are trying to give another destination to the plants, and our Future E project, it means to transform our thermal power plants in another destinations. But globally, now we are working on a digital transformation of all our thermal power plants, because in the recent industrial plan we presented last week, for thermal generation, for example, the digital transformation is the only possibility to become flexible and adapt to the new energy situation and to the new renewables leaded energy world. So digital transformation means digital skills and possibility for all the different ages of workers to be employable. So we started, just to give to Sharon and to Samantha the next steps of our action. We started this digital training program in all the countries. We are based in Italy and in Spain, but we have many subsidiaries in Latin America, in Africa and Asia, because we are, our business development is only in renewables, coming to the renewables pledge, because we strongly agree, as Sharon said, that renewables are the future and the access to energy is possible from a renewable point of view. So our business development, our new plants are only renewables, but we have to manage all the traditional oil and fuel coal power plant. We have coal plants not only in Italy but also in Spain, and we will have to face Russia, and it will be not easy. But as a message, we are committed to the social development goals. We have in our global framework agreement the global compact principles also, and so we are ready to play our role. I mean, because as it has been said this morning, each actors has to play its role, and I'm particularly glad to have been invited in Canada last May from the Minister McKenna, because, for example, the Just Transition Task Force in Canada are really a best practice and a good example, and we need to I'm looking to my Italian trade union colleagues, we need to explore these practices and to push our government and our local communities to work together, because just to close my brief intervention, for example, in 2025 we will have to stop coal production in Italy according to the energy strategy in our countries, and 10 years are nothing. We have 2 enormous coal power plants in Italy, in Brindisi and in Civitavecchia. And if we don't plan together with governments and local institutions a real transition programs, a real transition and sustainable financed programs, we are really risking. But I trust, because I believe in the social dialogue and in the multi-stakeholder approach. I trust that we will be successful, but it's really a hard work, a strong challenge. We are ready.
And it comes, thank you, Christina. Give her a big hand. And it comes back to trust and dialogue, because unless we sit together, we cannot figure out how to manage it. And none of us has the luxury of saying, well, we're just going to ignore that. That's the message of this afternoon, to build the platforms. But let me tell you a tale of 2 employers, and then you'll understand why we are optimistic with the Italian union support and industrial to find a way through with NL. In my own country, Australia, there was an employer who, I'll just use the first name, Richard, who I had negotiated with when I was there as head of the ACTU. Really good collective agreements with the unions. I had a lot of respect for, broadly based company. And once I was sitting down with him in Australia just about 2 or 3 years ago, and he said, Sharon, what's all this stuff about coal? Just nonsense. I said, well, actually, it's not nonsense, Richard. You must understand that the climate science is telling us that the world is, in deep trouble. And he said, anyway, we argued the science. Can you believe it? A very educated, very progressive employer, I would have thought, argued it backwards and forwards, and finally looked at me and he said, oh, well, if they get really serious about this, we'll just sell off our coal stocks. I'm going, you can't do that. You have to take responsibility for what, you've reaped the profits from, and now we have to move on. But there are advantages for your company in renewable energies and diversifying the energy base. Land of solar, land of wind, my goodness. Anyway, then we started a conversation with Christina, and she restored my faith, because it isn't that it's easy. It's not easy. Italian unions will tell you, NL will tell you, it's not always, niceties and easy solutions. But the determination to find the solution, it's what's different. And NL is not simply about saying we're going to walk away from our coal-fired power stations. You heard they're trying to transform them where they exist into digital bases so they can cope with new and emerging energy. Where the site's not positive for renewables, because they're also investing madly in wind and other areas in other countries, then they don't walk away from those communities. They recover the land, make sure it's usable, and then they're doing all sorts of things, building industry parks, finding other partners, and so on. So That's what we want from our companies. Not that they will be perfect. That's our job to actually make them behave in the right way. But it's all about taking responsibility jointly with the unions, with the investors, with the governments. And that's why we wanted to end on an industry note, because the governments have to put in place the framework, the scaffolding, the legislation, the national dialogue and measures. What's the plan for the country? But we say unions have a right to know what their government is doing, what the plans are for the future. They have a right to be at the table to actually negotiate the just transition measures. But we say that with companies too. Unions have a right to know what industry is doing, what the measures are, and be at the table to design the future using the power of our collective agreements. And of course, we say the same about community, that communities have a right to be involved in the dialogue when it affects them and their members, their land, and the future. So thank you, Christina. Thank you, Howard. I think this is showing you that stakeholders, employers, cities, and indeed governments all have a role, and it is about the communities of the future we will build. I know that there's lots of stories out there, and I'm sorry that I don't think we have any time available to hear them, but Sam is here. We want to know if you want to document your story, to help set up a platform. That's why we built the Just Transition Centre. You can hear that it is, in fact, a repository and an advisor for people who want to make the change. And we want all of our unions with decent employers and our investors to be part of that shift. So thank you very much.